The season of 1817 had begun with all the predictable fanfare London society could muster: glittering assemblies, whispered conspiracies behind painted fans, and the inevitable parade of eligible gentlemen whose titles preceded their actual merit by considerable margins. Lady Eveline Ashford had endured precisely 3 balls, 2 garden parties, and 1 insufferably dull musicale before concluding that the marriage mart was nothing more than an elaborate charade designed to separate sensible women from their good judgment. She had not, however, anticipated that her sister's wedding would introduce her to the one man who would challenge every carefully constructed wall she had built around her heart. The ceremony itself had been lovely. Charlotte had looked radiant in her wedding gown. Lord Hampton had stumbled charmingly through his vows, and even their father had managed not to weep until the couple departed for their wedding breakfast. It was during the reception, amid the clinking of champagne glasses and the rustle of silk gowns, that Eveline first laid eyes on Arthur Ravenswood, the newly created Duke of Blackmore. He cut an imposing figure across the crowded ballroom, tall and broad-shouldered with dark hair that fell just slightly longer than fashion dictated. His features were striking rather than classically handsome: a strong jaw, prominent cheekbones, and eyes that seemed to miss nothing as they surveyed the gathering, with what Eveline could only describe as carefully concealed amusement. Several young ladies had already positioned themselves in his vicinity, their mothers not far behind, circling like silk-clad predators who had spotted particularly valuable prey. Eveline watched this spectacle with the detached interest one might afford a mildly entertaining theatrical production. She had heard the stories, of course, everyone had. The Duke of Blackmore's reputation preceded him like thunder before a storm. Tales of scandalous liaisons, ruined reputations, and a complete disregard for propriety that would have seen a lesser man expelled from polite society entirely. Only his title and considerable fortune kept the doors open, though many a matron clutched her pearls when his name was mentioned. "Eveline, darling, you must come meet the Duke." Her mother materialized at her elbow, fingers gripping with that particular maternal determination that brooked no argument. Such a distinguished gentleman, and he particularly requested an introduction. Did he? Eveline's tone could have frozen the Thames in July. How extraordinarily bold of him. Eveline. Her mother's voice carried that warning note, the one that had made both Ashford daughters straighten their spines since childhood. Your sister's happiness depends upon maintaining cordial relations with all guests. The Duke is Lord Hampton's particular friend. You will be gracious. Gracious was perhaps not the word Eveline would have chosen for the encounter that followed. Dutiful, certainly, polite by the narrowest of margins, but as her mother steered her through the crowd toward where the Duke stood conversing with a group of gentlemen, Eveline felt an unusual flutter of something she refused to acknowledge as nervousness. "Your Grace," her mother executed a perfect curtsy. "May I present my daughter, Lady Eveline Ashford?" The Duke turned, and Eveline found herself subjected to the full force of his attention. His eyes were grey, she noted distantly, the colour of storm clouds gathering on the horizon. They swept over her with an assessment that was neither impudent nor dismissive, but rather curious, as though she were a puzzle he had not yet determined how to solve. "Lady Eveline." His bow was precise, his voice a deep baritone that carried the refined accent of someone educated at the finest institutions. "Your sister speaks of you with great affection. She tells me you are quite passionate about literature." "My sister is kind to speak of me at all," Eveline replied, her tone carefully neutral, "though I suspect she exaggerates my modest interests to make for better conversation." A smile ghosted across his lips, not the practiced charm she had observed him deploying with the other ladies, but something more genuine. "I doubt very much that anything about you requires exaggeration, my lady." "How flattering. You've known me all of 30 seconds and already formed such a comprehensive opinion." "Eveline!" Her mother's scandalized whisper was barely audible, but the Duke's smile only deepened. "Actually, I have been observing you for the better part of an hour," he said, apparently not at all offended by her tartness. "You are the only woman in this room who has not glanced in my direction even once. That is either remarkable disinterest or remarkable discipline. I find myself curious which. Perhaps I simply have better things to occupy my attention than monitoring the movements of every titled gentleman who enters a room." Undoubtedly true, Yet I suspect it is more that you have already decided you know precisely what sort of man I am, and therefore see no point in wasting your observation on confirming your assumptions." The accuracy of this statement caught Eveline off guard. She felt her cheeks warm slightly, which only irritated her further. "You presume a great deal, Your Grace." "I do," he agreed amiably. "It is one of my many flaws. Lady Hampton was kind enough to enumerate several others during our conversation earlier. Apparently I am also stubborn, occasionally thoughtless, and possessed of an unfortunate tendency toward honesty, when discretion would better serve." Despite herself, Eveline felt her lips twitch. Charlotte would indeed say such things, particularly about someone she actually liked. Her sister had never mastered the art of polite insincerity. "My sister is not known for flattery, which is precisely why I value her opinion." The Duke's expression sobered slightly. "And why I am particularly interested in yours, Lady Evelyn. I understand you are not easily impressed by titles or fortune. Is anyone truly impressed by such things, or do we merely pretend to be because society demands it?" A philosophical question for a wedding reception. "I like you already. I cannot imagine why that should concern me either way." Her mother made a small sound of distress, but the Duke laughed, a genuine, unguarded sound that drew glances from across the room. "You are absolutely extraordinary. Lady Eveline, would you do me the honor of dancing with me? I promise to be perfectly proper and not at all libertine-like, despite what you may have heard." "I have heard a great many things, Your Grace, and I am quite certain they are all true. Therefore, I must decline. If you will excuse me, I see my father requires my attention." She did not wait for a response, executing a curtsy so brief it bordered on rudeness before extracting herself from her mother's grip and making her way across the ballroom. Her father, in fact, was deep in conversation with several other gentlemen and clearly required nothing of the sort, but he smiled when she appeared at his side and patted her hand affectionately. "Running from admirers already?" he teased gently. "Hardly admiration, Papa. The Duke was merely being polite to his friend's new sister-in-law." "And that is why he watched you cross the entire ballroom as though you were the only person in it?" Eveline refused to turn around and verify this claim. "He is a duke. They are accustomed to staring at whatever catches their fancy." Her father chuckled. "You are very determined not to like him." "I am very determined to be sensible. There is a difference." The conversation might have ended there, had not the Duke himself appeared at her father's side some minutes later. What followed was a pleasant discussion between the men about politics and the upcoming parliamentary session, a discussion in which Eveline found herself reluctantly engaged when the Duke directly solicited her opinion on a recent bill regarding property rights. He listened to her response with genuine attention, asked thoughtful follow-up questions, and did not once attempt to diminish or redirect her views, despite their being considerably more progressive than those of most ladies of her acquaintance. It was, Eveline had to admit with great reluctance, rather refreshing. Still, when the reception finally concluded, and they returned home to Ashford House in the early evening, Eveline was quite certain she had seen the last of the Duke of Blackmore's particular attentions. She was, of course, entirely wrong. The first note arrived the following morning, delivered along with a massive arrangement of winter roses, her favourite flower, which she had mentioned exactly once during their brief conversation about literature. The note was not flowery or effusive, but rather contained a reference to their discussion and a recommendation for a book of political philosophy he thought she might enjoy. Eveline told herself it meant nothing. The second note arrived 3 days later, this time with no flowers, but with the actual book he had recommended along with his own annotations in the margins. They were insightful, witty, and occasionally quite challenging to her own views. Eveline told herself it was merely friendly. By the time the fifth note arrived, even she could no longer maintain such willful delusion. The Duke of Blackmore was courting her, quietly, persistently, and with a thoughtfulness that stood in stark contrast to everything his reputation suggested he should be. It was 3 weeks after Charlotte's wedding, when the matter finally came to a head over dinner at Ashford House. Her parents had invited several guests, and the conversation had naturally turned to the subject of eligible bachelors and the upcoming Christmas season festivities. Lady Pemberton, a notorious gossip of their acquaintance, had seized upon the topic with particular enthusiasm. "Of course, the Duke of Blackmore will be attending the Hartley Ball," she announced, as though this were intelligence of critical national importance. One wonders which unfortunate young lady will find herself the target of his attentions this season. The man is utterly without scruples, you know. Lady Whitmore herself told me. Lady Whitmore is a bitter woman spreading vicious lies because her daughter was not to the Duke's taste, Eveline heard herself say, her voice cutting across the table with surprising sharpness. And I find it remarkable how readily people repeat such stories without questioning their veracity. A stunned silence fell over the dinner table. Her mother's face had gone pale, her father's eyebrows had climbed toward his hairline, and Lady Pemberton looked as though she had been slapped. "My dear child," Lady Pemberton recovered herself with visible effort, "you cannot possibly defend such a man. His reputation is well established. Why, everyone knows precisely what they have been told to know," Eveline interrupted again, her temper now fully engaged. "And what they have been told has been carefully cultivated by a family whose pride was wounded when their daughter's shortcomings were deemed unacceptable. I have made it my business to investigate these claims, and I have found them to be largely fabrication and exaggeration." This was not entirely true. She had investigated nothing. But she had observed, and she had listened to her sister Charlotte, who knew Lord Hampton's friends better than anyone. And Charlotte had been quite clear that Arthur Ravenswood was nothing like his reputation suggested. "Eveline," her mother's voice trembled slightly, "what has brought on this passionate defense?" "Common sense and basic fairness, Mama. I simply cannot abide watching a man condemned without evidence merely because it suits certain people's purposes to see him maligned." Her father was watching her with an expression she could not quite read. "Has the Duke given you reason to believe these accusations false?" "The Duke has given me nothing but courtesy and respect. He has never been anything but proper in his conduct toward me. If that is the behavior of a libertine, then perhaps we need to revise our definition of the term." The dinner concluded shortly thereafter, in a fog of awkward conversation and meaningful glances. After the guests had departed, Eveline found herself summoned to her father's study. Never a promising sign. He stood by the window overlooking the garden, hands clasped behind his back, saying nothing for a long moment. When he finally spoke, his voice was gentle but serious. "Tell me truly, Evie, do you have feelings for the Duke?" "No," she said automatically. Then, with more honesty, "I don't know, I barely know him." "Yet you defended him quite vigorously at dinner." "Because it was unjust. Because I despise gossip and character assassination. Because—" She broke off, frustrated by her inability to articulate what she felt. "Because you see something in him that others have missed," her father finished quietly. "Or perhaps something that he has allowed you to see that he shows no one else. Perhaps I am simply being foolish. Perhaps." He turned to face her, his expression kind. "Or perhaps you are being brave enough to look beyond surface appearances. That is not foolishness, my dear. That is wisdom. But you must also be cautious. If even half of what is said about him is true—" "It isn't," Eveline said with more certainty than she felt. Her father studied her for a long moment. "Then you must discover the truth for yourself. But know this, I will not force you toward any man, regardless of his title or fortune. Your happiness is worth more to me than any alliance. Do you understand?" "Yes, Papa." "Good. Now, I believe you should retire for the evening. The Christmas season approaches, and you will need your rest for all the festivities ahead." Eveline kissed her father's cheek and made her way upstairs, but sleep proved elusive. She kept thinking about the Duke, about his notes, his attention, the way he had looked at her during Charlotte's wedding as though she were a puzzle worth solving. And she thought about her own response, the vehemence with which she had defended him to relative strangers. What was she doing? The answer came 3 days later in the form of another note, this one requesting permission to call upon her the following afternoon. It was properly addressed to her father, as propriety demanded, but enclosed within was a smaller note meant for her eyes alone. "Lady Eveline, I understand you recently defended my character at a dinner party. I am both honored and mortified. Honored that you would speak on my behalf, mortified that you should feel compelled to do so. I wonder if you might grant me the opportunity to tell you the truth of things myself. I owe you that much, at least. Your servant, Arthur Not Blackmore, or Your Grace, or any of the formal signatures he might have used, just Arthur, as though they were already beyond such pretense, Eveline found herself staring at that signature for far longer than was strictly necessary, tracing the strong, confident strokes of his handwriting with her eyes. Then she carefully folded both notes and tucked them into her writing desk drawer, where they joined the growing collection of correspondence she told herself meant nothing at all. When the Duke called the following afternoon, her father received him in the drawing room, while Eveline arranged herself on the settee with a book she had no intention of reading. She heard their voices in conversation, her father's measured tones, the Duke's deeper responses, and felt her pulse quicken in a way that annoyed her tremendously. She was still annoyed when the door opened and the Duke was shown in, still annoyed when he bowed with that particular grace that suggested both respect and something more personal. She was even annoyed by how pleased she felt to see him, which was perhaps the most irritating thing of all. Lady Eveline. He remained standing until she gestured for him to sit. Thank you for receiving me. Courtesy demanded it, she said coolly. You are my brother-in-law's particular friend. Is that the only reason? Should there be another? A smile tugged at his lips. I had hoped there might be, but perhaps I am presuming again. You are. She set aside her book. Your note suggested you wished to tell me the truth of your circumstances. I confess to being curious what that truth might be. Directly to business, then. I appreciate your forthrightness. He leaned forward slightly, his expression growing serious. The stories you have heard about me, about my behavior, my character, they stem from a single source. Lady Whitmore and her daughter, Cecilia. I had surmised as much. What you may not know is why they bear me such particular ill will. He paused, as if gathering his thoughts. 2 years ago, when I inherited my uncle's title, I was immediately beset by every ambitious mother in London seeking to secure a duke for her daughter. The Whitmores were particularly persistent. They arranged circumstances such that Miss Cecilia and I were frequently thrown together, always with witnesses present who could attest to supposed intimacies that never actually occurred. Eveline felt something cold settle in her stomach. They attempted to compromise you into marriage. They did. The final attempt took place at Lady Hertford's Christmas ball, nearly 3 years ago now. Miss Cecilia maneuvered me into a private corridor, then called for her mother and several other witnesses. She claimed I had lured her there with promises of marriage, that I had behaved inappropriately. It was her word against mine, and society is always more inclined to believe the young lady. What did you do? I called her bluff. I knew that Lady Hertford employed a particular footman who could verify that I had been in the library for the entirety of the time Miss Cecilia claimed we were in the corridor. I also had a letter she had sent me, one of many, expressing her affection in terms no proper young lady should use toward a gentleman to whom she was not engaged. I offered to produce both the witness and the letter. And Lady Whitmore realized her scheme had failed. But rather than accept defeat gracefully, she launched a campaign to destroy my reputation instead. If she could not force me into marriage through compromise, she would ensure that no other respectable family would consider an alliance with me. She has been remarkably successful. Eveline absorbed this information in silence. It had the ring of truth. It explained too much, fit too perfectly with what she knew of the Whitmores' character and the Duke's behavior. Why tell me this now? Because you defended me. Because you deserve to know that your instincts were correct. He held her gaze steadily. And because I find myself caring very much what you think of me, Lady Eveline, more than I have cared about anyone's opinion in a very long time. The admission hung in the air between them, weighted with implications neither of them seemed ready to fully acknowledge. Eveline felt her careful composure beginning to crack. Your Grace. Arthur, he corrected gently. When we are in private, I would very much like you to call me Arthur. That would be improper. Undoubtedly, but we have already established that I am a man of questionable character. Surely I cannot be blamed for corrupting you with something so scandalous as the use of my Christian name. Despite everything, Eveline laughed. You are ridiculous. I am persistent. There is a difference. He stood, recognizing that he had stayed as long as propriety allowed. The annual Christmas ball at Hartley House approaches. Will you be attending? My family has been invited, yes. Then perhaps you would do me the very great honor of saving me a dance. I promise to be perfectly proper, though I cannot promise not to attempt engaging you in conversation about topics young ladies are not supposed to discuss, such as philosophy, politics, literature, science, all the fascinating subjects polite society has deemed too taxing for feminine minds. His eyes glinted with humor. I find rules tedious, and I find you captivating. It seems a logical combination. Eveline knew she should say no, knew that accepting would be tantamount to acknowledging what was growing between them, knew that her defense of him at dinner had already set tongues wagging, and this would only fuel further speculation. She also knew with sudden and startling clarity that she no longer cared. "One dance," she heard herself say, "and if you bore me with your conversation, I shall never forgive you. Then I shall endeavor to be fascinating." He bowed over her hand, his lips not quite touching her glove. "Until the Hartley Christmas ball, Lady Eveline." After he departed, Eveline remained in the drawing room for some time, staring at nothing in particular and trying to understand what had just happened. Somewhere in the space of a few weeks, she had gone from absolute certainty about Arthur Ravenswood's character to absolute certainty of the opposite. More troubling still, she had gone from determined indifference to something that felt dangerously close to anticipation. That evening, over dinner with just her parents, her father studied her thoughtfully. "The Duke seems a decent man," he observed carefully. "Nothing like his reputation would suggest." "No," Eveline agreed, "he is not. And your opinion of him has evolved." It was not a question, but Eveline answered anyway. "My opinion has been corrected by facts rather than rumor. That is all." Her mother set down her fork with a decisive clink. "Eveline, darling, we must speak plainly. If the Duke is courting you, and it is quite obvious that he is, then we must consider what that means. His reputation, regardless of its accuracy, will reflect upon you, upon our entire family. Society can be cruel and—" "Mamma." Eveline's voice was calm but firm. "I understand your concerns. I share them to some extent, but I will not allow gossip and innuendo to dictate my choices. If society chooses to judge me harshly for accepting the attentions of a man whose only real crime was refusing to be manipulated into marriage, then perhaps society's judgment is worth less than I had thought." Her parents exchanged glances, one of those long, wordless conversations that 25 years of marriage made possible. Finally, her father spoke. "We trust your judgment, Evie. We always have. But promise us you will be careful. Not all battles are worth fighting, particularly when the costs fall hardest on the warrior." "I promise, Papa." But even as she made that promise, Eveline wondered if it was one she could keep. Because the truth was becoming increasingly difficult to deny, she did not simply respect Arthur Ravenswood or find him intellectually stimulating. She was beginning to care for him in a way that went far beyond casual regard. And that, she suspected, was going to complicate everything. The weeks leading up to the Hartley Christmas ball passed in a strange sort of suspension. Arthur called twice more, each visit meticulously proper, and yet charged with an undercurrent of something neither of them named. He brought her books and engaged her in debates that left her energized and challenged. He asked her opinions on matters of actual substance, and listened to her answers as though they genuinely mattered. He was, in every way, the opposite of what she had been led to expect. Charlotte visited one afternoon, ostensibly to discuss the upcoming Christmas celebrations, but actually, as sisters always did, to probe for information. "You have been spending time with Blackmore," she observed over tea, her tone carefully neutral. "The Duke has called several times, yes. He is your husband's friend. It would be rude to refuse him. Evie, you have never in your life done anything merely to avoid rudeness. You like him." There was no point in denying it. "I do," Eveline admitted. "Against all expectation and better judgment, I find him remarkable." Charlotte's face broke into a delighted smile. "I knew it. From the moment I saw you speaking with him at my wedding, I knew there was something there. Hampton thinks so too. He says Arthur hasn't been this interested in anyone since ever, actually. That cannot possibly be true. Surely he has courted other ladies. He has danced with them, conversed with them, even escorted some to various events. But Hampton says this is different. He says Arthur talks about you constantly, asks about your family, worries whether he is proceeding too quickly or too slowly. The man is utterly besotted." Eveline felt warmth spread through her chest. an alarming, wonderful sensation that she absolutely could not afford to indulge. His reputation is entirely manufactured by a vindictive woman who could not accept rejection. You know this already, Evie. Why do you keep returning to it? Because others will. Because I cannot simply ignore the reality of how society will perceive any connection between us. Charlotte reached across the tea table and took her sister's hand. Society will perceive whatever it chooses to perceive, regardless of the truth. But you have never cared about society's opinion before. Why start now? Because this time, it is not just my reputation at stake. No, Charlotte agreed gently. This time, your heart is at stake too, and that makes it far more frightening, doesn't it? Eveline could not answer, because her sister had identified the exact source of her anxiety with uncomfortable precision. It was one thing to risk social censure. She had never particularly cared about that. It was quite another to risk her heart on a man whom society had already condemned, no matter how undeserved that condemnation might be. But perhaps, she thought, as Charlotte changed the subject to safer topics, perhaps that was exactly what made it worth doing. Perhaps the things that frightened us most were the things that mattered most. The night of the Hartley Christmas ball arrived with the sort of perfect winter weather that seemed designed for romantic drama. Light snow falling in picturesque fashion, cold enough to warrant fur-trimmed cloaks, but not so bitter as to discourage attendance. Ashford House had been in a state of controlled chaos all day, as Eveline's mother supervised the preparations for the evening. Eveline herself had taken unusual care with her appearance, selecting a gown of deep sapphire silk that brought out the blue in her eyes. Her maid had arranged her dark hair in an elegant style adorned with pearls, and she wore the diamond necklace her father had given her for her last birthday. She told herself this had nothing to do with the Duke and everything to do with maintaining family pride at one of the season's most important events. She did not quite believe herself. The Hartley ballroom was already crowded when they arrived, decorated lavishly for the Christmas season, with evergreen boughs, ribbons of red and gold, and hundreds of candles casting everything in warm, flickering light. An orchestra played in one corner, couples already moving through the patterns of a country dance. The air smelled of pine, cinnamon, and the mingled perfumes of several hundred people dressed in their finest. Eveline had been in the ballroom approximately 4 minutes when she felt his presence. She did not see Arthur at first. The crowd was too thick, too many bodies moving between them, but she knew he was there with the same certainty she knew her own name. And when she finally spotted him across the room, she found he was already watching her. He cut through the crowd with purpose, and Eveline felt her pulse quicken traitorously. He looked devastating in formal evening attire, all dark elegance and restrained power. Several women turned to watch his progress, but his attention never wavered from her. Lady Eveline, his bow was perfect. You are radiant this evening. Your Grace, I trust you are well? Immeasurably better now. He offered his arm. Might I claim that dance you promised me? Unless you have reconsidered and decided my conversation will be unbearably dull after all. I have not reconsidered, though I reserve the right to do so if you prove insufficiently entertaining. His laugh drew more glances as he led her onto the floor. The orchestra was beginning a waltz, a rather daring choice for a Christmas ball, but Lady Hartley had never been conventional. Arthur drew her into position with easy confidence, one hand at her waist, the other clasping hers. I must confess, he said as they began to move, I have been anticipating this moment for weeks. Have you? I cannot imagine why. Surely dancing with me is no different than dancing with any other lady. Then you have a very poor imagination indeed. His grey eyes met hers, and there was no humour in them now, only intensity. Everything about you is different, Eveline. You must know that by now. The use of her Christian name, even spoken low enough that no one else could hear, sent a shiver through her. You should not call me that in public. We are in the middle of a crowded ballroom. No one can hear us. Someone will notice. Let them. His hand tightened fractionally at her waist. I have spent 3 years living under the shadow of lies and innuendo. I have watched my reputation shredded by people who do not know me and do not care to learn the truth. I have accepted it because fighting seemed futile, but I find I am no longer content with acceptance. Arthur, the name escaped before she could stop it, and his expression softened into something that made her breath catch. Say it again. We are at a ball. People are watching. Then let them watch. Let them see that Arthur Ravenswood, the terrible Duke of Blackmore, is dancing with the only woman in London brave enough to judge him on his own merits, rather than on gossip. He executed a turn that brought them closer than strictly proper. Let them see that I am utterly, hopelessly captivated by Lady Eveline Ashford, who told her father I was not good enough for her, and yet somehow makes me want to become the man she deserves. Eveline felt tears prick her eyes, entirely inappropriate for a ballroom, but there nonetheless. You heard about that? Your father mentioned it when he granted me permission to court you properly. He found it amusing. I found it challenging in the best possible way. I was wrong, she heard herself say. About you. About everything I thought I knew. Were you? Or were you simply waiting for evidence to support a different conclusion? The waltz ended too soon, drawing them apart with the social distance propriety demanded. But something had shifted between them in those few minutes, some unspoken acknowledgement that neither of them could take back. As Arthur escorted her back to where her mother waited, Eveline caught sight of Lady Whitmore across the ballroom. The woman was watching them with naked hostility, her face twisted into an expression of such venom that Eveline actually felt a moment of pity for her. How exhausting it must be to carry that much bitterness. Do not let her trouble you, Arthur murmured, having followed her gaze. Her power lies only in what we allow her to take from us. I am not troubled, Eveline replied, and realized it was true. I am merely resolved. Resolved to what? She turned to face him fully, aware that they were drawing attention, no longer caring. Resolved that I will not allow malice and falsehood to dictate my choices. Resolved that I will know the truth of things myself, rather than accepting what others tell me. Resolved that— She paused, gathering courage. Resolved that I would very much like to know you better, Arthur, if you are willing. His entire face transformed with a smile of such genuine joy that Eveline felt an answering warmth spread through her chest. I am willing, he said quietly. More than willing. I am yours to know, Eveline, for as long as you wish it. The rest of the evening passed in a blur of dances, conversations, and pointed looks from various quarters of London society. Eveline danced with Arthur twice more, scandalous by any standard, and found she could not bring herself to care about the whispers that followed in their wake. Charlotte found her near midnight, eyes dancing with mischief. You have set the ton ablaze, sister dear. Everyone is talking about you and the Duke. Let them talk. Oh, I intend to. This is the most entertainment I have had since my own wedding. Charlotte squeezed her hand. You truly care for him, don't you? I do, Eveline admitted. Foolish as it may be, I do. It is not foolish. It is brave. And I think you're going to need that bravery in the days ahead. Charlotte's words proved prophetic. The morning after the Christmas ball, Eveline woke to find her mother in tears and her father grim-faced over breakfast. On the table between them lay several calling cards, and not the pleasant kind that preceded social visits. What has happened? Eveline demanded, her stomach sinking. Her father gestured to the cards. We have been cut by 5 families this morning. Lady Pemberton sent a note declining our invitation to Christmas dinner. Lord and Lady Morrison have rescinded their invitation to their annual holiday gathering. He looked at his daughter with a mixture of concern and something that might have been pride. It seems your association with the Duke has made our family rather less than desirable company. Eveline sank into a chair, the reality of what she had invited beginning to settle over her like a cold cloak. I am sorry, Papa. I never meant— Do not apologize for being true to yourself. Her father's voice was firm. I would rather be cut by hypocrites than maintain friendships built on lies and cowardice. Your mother and I stand with you, Evie. Always. Her mother nodded, dabbing at her eyes. Though I confess, I had hoped it would not come to this quite so quickly. A knock at the door interrupted them. The butler entered with another note, this one addressed to Eveline specifically. She recognized Arthur's handwriting instantly and felt her heart constrict. Eveline, I have heard what is happening. I cannot tell you how sorry I am that my presence in your life has brought you such difficulty. If you wish to sever our acquaintance, I will understand completely and will trouble you no further. Your reputation and your family's standing must take precedence over my selfish desires. But if you are willing to weather this storm, if you believe, as I do, that truth and honor are worth fighting for, then I am yours. In whatever capacity, you will have me. Always yours, Arthur. Eveline read the note twice, then carefully folded it and looked at her parents. He is offering to step away, to spare me further difficulty. And what do you wish to do? Her father asked. It should have been a difficult question. It should have required deliberation and careful consideration of all the social ramifications. Instead, Eveline found the answer rose from somewhere deep in her chest, clear and certain, and entirely without doubt. I wish to tell him, she said slowly, that I said he was not good enough for me. But I was wrong. The real question is whether I am good enough for him, whether I have the courage to stand beside a man who has been wronged by society and help him reclaim the truth. She met her father's eyes. And I believe I do, Papa. I believe I must. Her father smiled, not the polite social smile he used in company, but the genuine expression he reserved for moments of real emotion. Then you have our blessing, my dear. Though I suspect the path ahead will not be easy. Nothing worth having ever is, Eveline replied. She spent the remainder of the morning composing a response to Arthur's note, striking out sentence after sentence until she finally settled on simple honesty. Arthur, I am not frightened by gossip, and I will not be moved by social pressure. If society wishes to punish me for seeing the truth where others choose to remain blind, then I accept that consequence gladly. I believe in you. I believe in us. And I am not going anywhere. Yours, Eveline. She sent the note before she could second-guess herself, then prepared to face whatever came next. What came next was perhaps unexpected, not a slow campaign of social ostracism, but rather a rapid polarization of society into clear factions. Some sided with the Whitmores and their campaign against Arthur's character, but others, particularly those who had always chafed under Lady Whitmore's domineering influence, began to question the narrative they had been fed. Charlotte and Lord Hampton threw their full support behind Arthur and Eveline, hosting a dinner party in their honour that drew a surprising number of attendees. Several of Arthur's former military colleagues emerged from rural retirement to vouch for his character, and slowly, painfully, the truth began to spread. The real turning point came on Christmas Eve, at what was meant to be a small gathering at Ashford House for family and close friends. Arthur had been invited, of course, and arrived bearing gifts for everyone. Thoughtful tokens that showed he had paid attention to each person's interests and preferences. For Eveline, he brought a first edition of her favourite novel, along with a note tucked inside the front cover that made her blush when she read it later. They were standing by the windows overlooking the snow-covered garden when the butler announced an unexpected visitor, Miss Cecilia Whitmore, requesting a private audience. The entire room fell silent. Arthur's face went carefully blank, and Eveline felt her protective instincts flare. But before anyone could speak, Miss Whitmore was shown in, looking considerably less confident than her last public appearance. She was a pretty girl, Eveline observed objectively, with golden hair and delicate features. But there was something strained about her expression, something that spoke of sleepless nights and troubled conscience. Your Grace, Miss Whitmore curtsied to Arthur with shaking hands. Lady Eveline, Lord and Lady Ashford, I apologize for the intrusion, but I need to speak, if you will permit me. By all means, Eveline's father said, his tone neutral, though I confess to being curious what brings you here on Christmas Eve. Miss Whitmore drew a shaky breath. The truth, she said simply. I have come to tell the truth. What followed was a halting but remarkably honest confession. Miss Whitmore described how her mother had orchestrated the entire campaign against Arthur's reputation, how she had coached Cecilia in lies, spread false rumours, and systematically destroyed his social standing because he had dared refuse an alliance she considered beneath his dignity to decline. I was young, Miss Whitmore said, tears streaming down her face now, and I was angry that he did not want me. I convinced myself that what we were doing was justified, that he deserved to suffer for rejecting me. But I have watched these past weeks as he has courted Lady Eveline with such obvious devotion and honour, and I cannot carry this burden any longer. He is a good man. He has always been a good man, and I am deeply, terribly sorry for what I have done. The room remained silent for a long moment. Then Arthur, to everyone's surprise, stepped forward and bowed. Thank you, he said quietly, for your courage in speaking the truth. I know how difficult this must have been. You are kinder than I deserve, Miss Whitmore whispered. Perhaps, But I have learned recently that carrying bitterness only poisons the bearer. You have given me a great gift tonight, Miss Whitmore. Not just vindication, but freedom from the weight of resentment I have carried for too long. He glanced at Eveline, and his expression softened. For that, I am grateful. After Miss Whitmore departed, with promises to make her confession public after the Christmas holiday, the gathering resumed with considerably more joy than before. But Eveline found herself drawn back to the window where Arthur stood, looking out at the falling snow. "Are you well?" she asked softly. "I am wondering how long I have wanted to hear those words," he admitted, "and discovering that now that I have, they matter less than I expected." "Why?" He turned to face her, and the expression in his grey eyes made her heart skip. "Because I have already found something worth more than vindication or social approval. I have found you, Eveline. And compared to that, everything else seems remarkably unimportant. Arthur, let me finish." He took her hand, propriety be damned. "When I first saw you at your sister's wedding, I thought you were the most magnificent creature I'd ever encountered. You looked at me with such withering disdain that I was immediately captivated. Every other woman in that room wanted my title or my fortune. You wanted nothing to do with me at all. It was refreshing." Despite the seriousness of the moment, Eveline laughed. "That is a terrible reason to be attracted to someone. Then it is fortunate I discovered approximately 17,000 better reasons in the weeks that followed." His thumb traced gentle circles on the back of her hand. "Your intelligence, your wit, your absolute refusal to accept easy answers or comfortable lies, the way you defended me even when you barely knew me, the courage it took to stand beside me when it would have been so much easier to walk away. I did not feel particularly courageous. That is what makes it courage, doing the thing that frightens you because it is right." He drew. "Eveline, I know this is neither the time nor the place, and I know we have not been acquainted long by society's standards, but I also know with absolute certainty that I love you. I have loved you since that first night when you told me I presumed too much. I will love you tomorrow and every day after, and if you will do me the extraordinary honor of becoming my wife, I promise to spend the rest of my life ensuring you never regret choosing me." Eveline felt tears on her cheeks, happy tears this time, joyful and overwhelming. "That was possibly the least romantic proposal I have ever heard." "Was it?" He smiled. "Then let me try again. Eveline Ashford, light of my life and torment of my waking hours, will you marry me?" "Yes," she said, laughing through her tears. "Yes, you ridiculous man. I will marry you." The kiss that followed was witnessed by her entire family through the drawing-room window, but Eveline found she could not bring herself to care. Let them watch. Let all of London watch, for that matter. She had found something rare and precious, someone who saw her truly and loved her completely, someone worth fighting for, worth defending, worth choosing every single day. When they finally drew apart, both breathless and grinning like fools, Charlotte was standing in the doorway wearing an expression of profound satisfaction. "I knew it," she announced to the room at large. "From the very beginning, I knew it. Hampton, you owe me £10. "You wagered on our engagement," Eveline demanded, caught between outrage and amusement. "Someone had to have faith in your romantic prospects, dear sister. You certainly were not helping matters with your insistence on despising him." Charlotte came forward to embrace them both. "But I am so very happy for you, truly." The rest of the evening passed in celebration, impromptu toasts, excited planning, and the sort of genuine joy that made the earlier social difficulties seem trivial by comparison. Arthur fit seamlessly into her family, trading quips with Charlotte and engaging her father in discussions of politics and philosophy. Her mother, overcome with happiness, had actually managed to stop worrying about social consequences long enough to simply enjoy the moment. As midnight approached and the gathering began to disperse, Arthur drew Eveline aside one final time. "I have something for you," he said, producing a small velvet box. "I know we have not yet made a formal announcement, but I wanted you to have this. It belonged to my mother." Inside the box lay a ring, a sapphire surrounded by diamonds, antique and beautiful. Eveline caught her breath. "It is perfect," she whispered as he slipped it onto her finger. "Arthur, it is perfect." "As are you," he replied, pressing a kiss to her temple. "My fierce, wonderful Eveline. However did I manage to deserve you?" "You did not," she teased. I distinctly remember telling my father you were not good enough for me. So you did. And here we are, 3 months later, engaged to be married. I believe that makes this the season's greatest scandal. Good, Eveline said firmly. Let them be scandalized. Let them talk and whisper and clutch their pearls. We know the truth, and that is all that matters. As the clock struck midnight, marking the beginning of Christmas Day, Arthur drew her into another kiss, tender and full of promise. Around them, snow continued to fall, transforming London into something clean and new. And Eveline thought that perhaps that was the perfect metaphor for what they had found together. The chance to build something fresh and true from the wreckage of lies and misunderstanding. She had once declared she would not marry Arthur Ravenswood, even if he were the last man in London. Now she could not imagine marrying anyone else, could not imagine her life without his presence in it, challenging her, supporting her, loving her with a devotion that had proven stronger than gossip or social censure. "Merry Christmas, my love," Arthur murmured against her hair. "Merry Christmas," Eveline replied, and meant it with her whole heart. They stood together at the window, watching the snow fall over the sleeping city, both of them aware that challenges still lay ahead. Lady Whitmore would not surrender her crusade easily, and society's memory was long. But they would face those challenges together, and that made all the difference. Because sometimes the greatest love stories began not with instant attraction or perfect circumstances, but with misunderstanding overcome and truth acknowledged. Sometimes they began with a woman brave enough to look beyond reputation and a man patient enough to wait for her to see him clearly. And sometimes, just sometimes, they began with words spoken in anger that transformed into a promise that would last a lifetime. Not even if he were the last man in London. Except now, 3 months later, and engaged to be married, Eveline knew with absolute certainty that Arthur Ravenswood was not the last man in London. He was simply the only one who mattered, the only one who had ever really seen her, the only one she could imagine spending forever with. And that, she thought as she leaned into his embrace, while snow painted the world white beyond the windows, that was worth any scandal society could manufacture. That was worth everything. The new year of 1818 dawned with the kind of crisp, clear weather that seemed designed to mock the turbulent emotions churning through London's elite social circles. The announcement of Lady Eveline Ashford's engagement to the Duke of Blackmore had appeared in the morning papers on the first day of January, and by that evening every drawing-room in Mayfair was ablaze with speculation, condemnation, and in some quarters grudging admiration. Eveline discovered that being publicly engaged to Arthur was an entirely different experience from merely courting him under society's disapproving gaze. Where before she had been subjected to whispers and averted glances, she now faced outright confrontation from those who felt entitled to express their opinions about her choice. Lady Pemberton cornered her at the Westons' 12th night gathering, her fans snapping with agitation. "My dear Lady Eveline, surely you must reconsider this rash decision. The Duke's reputation has been publicly refuted by Miss Whitmore herself," Eveline interrupted coolly, "as you would know if you had bothered to attend the gathering, where she confessed to fabricating most of the rumours under her mother's direction. But I suppose facts are less interesting than scandal, are they not, Lady Pemberton?" The older woman's face purpled with indignation, but before she could formulate a response, Charlotte appeared at Eveline's elbow with Hampton in tow. "Lady Pemberton, how delightful to see you," Charlotte said, with a sweetness that fooled absolutely no one. "I was just telling Hampton about your new milliner. Such an interesting choice, very bold, rather like your opinions, wouldn't you say?" Lady Pemberton made a strangled sound and swept away, leaving Eveline trying not to laugh. "That was unkind," she murmured to her sister. "That was strategic," Charlotte corrected. "If people are going to gossip regardless, we might as well give them something to discuss besides your engagement. Now, where is your betrothed? I see several young ladies who look like they might be planning an ambush." Arthur was indeed surrounded by a small cluster of ladies, not all of them well-meaning, but he caught Eveline's eye across the room and excused himself with the sort of diplomatic grace that had likely saved him from countless awkward situations over the years. "Rescuing me already?" he teased as he reached her side. "We have only been engaged 3 weeks. Should I be concerned about your protective instincts?" "You should be grateful for them," Eveline retorted. Miss Hartwell looked ready to stage a dramatic swoon into your arms, and I am quite certain Lady Morrison was attempting to position herself between you and the exit. How terrifying. Whatever would I do without you? Suffer, presumably. His laugh drew more glances, but Eveline found herself increasingly indifferent to the stares. Let them look. Let them judge. She had chosen her path, and she would walk it with her head held high. The days that followed established a pattern that would define their engagement. Public appearances, where they demonstrated united front against social censure, private moments where they continued to discover one another with growing intimacy, and an unexpected groundswell of support from quarters neither of them had anticipated. Arthur's former military colleagues had not merely vouched for his character. They had launched what amounted to a campaign on his behalf. Officers who had served under his command during the war wrote letters to influential friends detailing his honor, courage, and unfailing integrity. Several prominent families began to question the narrative they had accepted, particularly after Miss Whitmore's confession became more widely known. Even Lady Whitmore's grip on society began to slip. Her vindictive nature, once disguised as protective maternal concern, became increasingly obvious as she refused to acknowledge her daughter's confession or apologize for her role in destroying Arthur's reputation. Those who had once feared her influence began to find their courage. "It is remarkable," Arthur observed one afternoon as they walked through Hyde Park under her mother's watchful supervision, "how quickly people will abandon a sinking ship. 6 months ago, these same families would have crossed the street to avoid me. Now they are sending invitations to dinner parties. Does it bother you? The hypocrisy of it?" "Less than you might think." He helped her navigate an icy patch on the path. "I have spent 3 years learning that most people's opinions are not worth the breath it takes to express them. The few whose regard I value, you, your family, Hampton, my true friends, those are the only opinions that matter. A convenient philosophy for a duke. A necessary philosophy for anyone hoping to maintain their sanity in society." He glanced at her, and something in his expression made her pulse quicken. "Though I confess, having you beside me makes the rest considerably easier to bear. You give me courage, Eveline. You make me want to be the man you believe I am. You already are that man. You always have been." They walked in companionable silence for a moment, before Arthur spoke again, his tone more serious. "I have been thinking about the wedding, about timing." Eveline's heart skipped. They had discussed the engagement at length, but had carefully avoided setting a specific date, both of them aware that rushing would only fuel more gossip. "And what conclusions have you reached?" "That I am done waiting for society's approval." He stopped walking, turning to face her directly. "I love you. You love me. We have done nothing wrong, yet we are allowing other people's prejudices to dictate when we can begin our life together. I propose we marry soon, perhaps in March, before the season begins in earnest." "March?" Eveline's breath caught. "That is only 2 months away." "Too soon." She considered this, weighing her own desires against the practical concerns that had been instilled in her since childhood. A long engagement was expected, particularly given the circumstances. It would allow time for the gossip to die down, for Arthur's reputation to be more fully restored, for society to become accustomed to their union. But it would also mean months more of this exhausting limbo, neither fully accepted nor entirely ostracized, constantly defending their choice to skeptics and critics, months of chaperoned visits when what she wanted was the freedom to simply be with him without her mother hovering nearby, months of restraint when every moment in his presence made her want to close the distance between what they were and what they would become. "Not too soon," she said finally. "If you truly wish it, then March is perfect." His smile transformed his entire face. "You are certain? I do not want you to feel rushed." "I am certain that I would marry you tomorrow if propriety allowed it. March represents extraordinary restraint on my part." "Then March it shall be." He lifted her gloved hand to his lips, that gesture that never failed to send warmth through her entire body. "Though I confess, your mention of tomorrow is quite tempting." Her mother's delicate cough from several paces behind them reminded Eveline that they were not, in fact, alone. Arthur released her hand with obvious reluctance, and they resumed walking as though they had been discussing nothing more significant than the weather. But everything had changed in that brief exchange. They had set a date, made their commitment concrete and imminent. In 2 months' time, Eveline would become the Duchess of Blackmore, a thought that filled her with equal parts excitement and trepidation. The announcement of their wedding date sparked another round of gossip, but this time Eveline found herself better equipped to handle it. She had Arthur's steadfast presence, her family's unwavering support, and a growing circle of friends who valued truth over rumour. She had also developed a rather satisfying ability to cut down critics with well-placed wit. When Lady Morrison suggested at a musicale that Eveline must be quite brave to marry a man with such a checkered past, Eveline had smiled sweetly and replied, "I find it requires far more bravery to form one's own opinions than to simply repeat whatever gossip one has heard, but I suppose we all have different definitions of courage." Charlotte, who had overheard the exchange, later told her she had never been more proud. The weeks of January passed in a flurry of wedding preparations. Eveline's mother threw herself into planning with the determination of a general organizing a military campaign. There were dressmakers to consult, menus to approve, guest lists to compile and revise based on who had proven themselves true friends and who had not. The Ashford household became a constant parade of merchants, milliners, and well-wishers. Through it all, Arthur remained a steady presence. He called daily, bringing small gifts that showed his attention to detail, a book he knew she would enjoy, hothouse flowers in winter, a music box that played her favourite melody. He engaged with her parents as though they were his own family, discussing politics with her father, and patiently enduring her mother's endless questions about the wedding breakfast arrangements. But it was the private moments Eveline treasured most. The stolen conversations in her father's library when her mother was occupied elsewhere, the way he would find her hand under the dinner table and squeeze it gently. The letters he wrote her, even though they saw each other nearly every day, filled with thoughts too intimate for public expression. One such letter arrived on a particularly cold morning in late January. "My dearest Eveline, I woke this morning thinking about the first time I saw you, standing across that crowded ballroom at your sister's wedding, looking supremely unimpressed by everything and everyone around you. I remember thinking that I had never seen anyone carry themselves with such unconscious grace, such absolute certainty of self. You were magnificent. I am sure you recall that I attempted conversation and was met with the sort of withering indifference usually reserved for particularly annoying insects. Most men would have been discouraged. I was enchanted. You see, I have spent years being judged by people who know nothing of me, being assessed for my title, my fortune, my supposed character flaws. And there you were judging me solely on my actual behavior in that moment, finding me presumptuous, perhaps arrogant, certainly too forward. It was the first honest assessment I had received in longer than I could remember. I fell in love with you in that instant, though I did not recognize it as love until much later. I simply knew that I needed to know you, to understand what made you so different from everyone else. To discover whether the woman who looked at me with such magnificent disdain might, with time and patience, come to see me as I truly am. The fact that you did, that you looked past the rumors and lies to see the man beneath, remains the greatest gift I have ever received. The fact that you chose me, continue to choose me despite everything it has cost you, humbles me beyond words. In 43 days, you will become my wife. I find myself counting down those days with an impatience that would embarrass me if I thought you did not share it. 43 days until I can call you mine before all the world. 43 days until I no longer have to maintain proper distance or restrain myself in your presence. 43 days until our life together truly begins. I love you, Eveline. I will love you when we are old and grey, and the world has forgotten all about the scandal of our courtship. I will love you through every season that follows this one, through every challenge and triumph that awaits us. I will love you until my last breath, and, if such things are possible, beyond. Forever yours. Arthur Eveline read the letter 3 times, then carefully folded it and added it to the growing collection she kept in her writing desk. She had become quite adept at hiding her emotions in public, but in the privacy of her room, she allowed herself to feel the full weight of what his words meant. She had been loved before, by her parents, by Charlotte, by friends and family who valued her. But she had never been loved like this, with such intensity, such certainty, such complete acceptance of who she was. Arthur did not want her to be softer, gentler, more conventional. He loved her precisely because she was none of those things. It was both terrifying and exhilarating. She composed a response that same afternoon, choosing her words with care. My dear Arthur, your letters have a terrible habit of making me cry at the most inconvenient times. My mother found me weeping over breakfast this morning and assumed I was having second thoughts about the wedding. I had to assure her that I was, in fact, having extremely enthusiastic first thoughts about becoming your wife. You asked me once why I defended you at that dinner party, before we had even properly established our acquaintance. I have thought about that question often in the weeks since. The truth is, I defended you because injustice offends me on a fundamental level. I cannot abide watching someone condemned without evidence, particularly when the condemnation serves only to elevate the accuser's wounded pride. But there was something else, too, something I did not fully recognize at the time. When I spoke of you that night, when I argued against the rumors and gossip, I felt something shift inside me, a certainty that you were worth defending, even at cost to myself. A recognition that the man I had met so briefly at Charlotte's wedding was not at all what society claimed him to be. Perhaps I was already falling in love with you even then. Perhaps some part of me knew, even as I told my father you were not good enough, that I was lying to myself as much as to him. You say I chose you despite everything it cost me. But Arthur, you gave me far more than you took. You gave me purpose, partnership, a love that makes me braver than I ever thought possible. You gave me the courage to trust my own judgment over society's pronouncements. You gave me yourself, honest, flawed, infinitely precious yourself. 43 days feels like an eternity. I find myself wishing we could simply skip ahead to March, wake up married, and spare ourselves the endless scrutiny and speculation. But perhaps this waiting serves a purpose. Perhaps it teaches us patience, strengthens our resolve, proves to ourselves and everyone watching that what we have is real and lasting. Or perhaps I am simply trying to find meaning in inconvenience. Either way, I will endure these 43 days knowing that each one brings me closer to you, closer to the life we will build together, closer to forever. All my love, Eveline. She sent the letter by private messenger rather than post, unwilling to risk even the remote possibility of its contents becoming public. Arthur's response arrived that same evening, just 3 words scrawled on expensive stationery. I am undone. She smiled, tucked the note into her bodice close to her heart, and went down to dinner where her parents were entertaining several guests who had remained loyal through all the controversy. February arrived with its characteristic grey skies and bitter cold, but it also brought a gradual shift in the social atmosphere surrounding their engagement. Miss Whitmore's confession had been published in several influential papers, corroborated by witnesses who had finally found the courage to speak. Lady Whitmore herself had been forced to withdraw from society after several prominent hostesses made it clear she was no longer welcome at their gatherings. The tide, it seemed, was finally turning. But not everyone was ready to accept defeat. On a particularly frigid evening in mid-February, as Eveline and Arthur attended a small dinner party at Charlotte and Hampton's townhouse, they encountered resistance from an unexpected quarter. Lord Whitmore, Cecilia's father and a man who had remained notably silent throughout his wife's campaign, cornered Arthur in the drawing room after dinner while the ladies had withdrawn. "Your Grace," he said, his voice low and urgent. "A word, if you please." Arthur excused himself from his conversation with Hampton and followed Lord Whitmore to a quiet corner. Eveline, returning from the ladies' retiring room, caught sight of them through the partially open door. She knew she should not eavesdrop, but something about Lord Whitmore's posture, aggressive, almost threatening, made her pause. "You have destroyed my family," Lord Whitmore was saying, his face red with suppressed emotion. "My wife is ruined. My daughter's reputation is in tatters, and for what? Because you refused to do the honourable thing and marry her when you compromised her." "I did not compromise her," Arthur replied, his voice dangerously calm. "Your daughter attempted to trap me into marriage through fabrication and manipulation. When that failed, your wife launched a campaign of slander that nearly destroyed me. I am sorry for your current difficulties, my lord, but they are entirely of your family's making. You could have prevented all of this by simply accepting the inevitable. Cecilia would have made you an acceptable duchess." "No." Arthur's voice cut through the air like a blade. "She would have made me miserable, and I would have made her equally so. I will not apologize for refusing to sacrifice my entire future happiness to spare your family's pride." then you are a selfish bastard who cares nothing for the consequences of his actions. I am a man who has learned the hard way that some consequences are worth accepting in order to live with integrity. Arthur straightened to his full height, and even from her position outside the door, Evelyn could sense the controlled power in his stance. Your family had a choice, Lord Whitmore. You could have accepted my refusal with grace and moved forward. Instead, you chose to wage war. You lost. I suggest you learn to live with that reality, rather than attempting to rewrite history to cast yourself as the victim. This is not over, Lord Whitmore hissed. Yes, Arthur said quietly. It is. And if you attempt to interfere with my marriage or harm Lady Evelyn in any way, I will stop being quite so restrained in my response. Do we understand one another? There was a moment of tense silence. Then Lord Whitmore turned on his heel and stormed from the room, nearly colliding with Eveline in the doorway. He did not apologize, merely pushed past her and continued toward the front entrance. Arthur appeared in the doorway a moment later, his face still tight with anger. When he saw Eveline, his expression softened immediately. You heard. Some of it. Are you all right? I am furious, he admitted, but also strangely relieved. I think that may have been the final confrontation we needed. The last attempt by the Whitmores to maintain their version of events. He took her hands in his. I meant what I said, Evelyn. If anyone attempts to harm you, they will have to go through both of us, she interrupted firmly. I am not some delicate flower who needs constant protection, Arthur. I am your partner, your equal. If there are battles to be fought, we fight them together. His smile was slow and warm. Have I mentioned recently that I am completely besotted with you? Not in the last several hours. I was beginning to feel neglected. Then allow me to remedy that immediately. He leaned closer, mindful of their semi-public location, but unable to resist the pull between them. I am besotted, bewitched, and entirely under your power, Lady Eveline Ashford, and in approximately 27 days, I will have the legal right to tell you so as often as I please. Only 27? I had lost count. I have not. I am acutely aware of every day, every hour that separates us from our wedding. His thumb traced circles on her palm through her glove. Though I confess, this waiting has given me time to plan. Plan what? Our honeymoon. I thought we might travel to my estate in Derbyshire. It is beautiful in spring, and far enough from London that we can have true privacy. No gossiping neighbours, no social obligations, just the two of us learning how to be married without the weight of society's judgment. The thought of true privacy with Arthur made Evelyn's pulse quicken in a way that had nothing to do with fear. That sounds perfect. I rather thought so. Though I should warn you, the estate is somewhat isolated. You will be entirely at my mercy for at least a fortnight. How terrifying. However shall I cope? I have some ideas about that. They were interrupted by Charlotte clearing her throat loudly from down the hallway. If you two are quite finished having private conversations in semi-public spaces, the rest of us would like to return to the drawing room. And Evelyn, your mother is looking for you with that expression that means she has thoughts about wedding flowers that simply cannot wait. Eveline groaned. I love my mother dearly, but if I must discuss one more shade of white versus cream versus ivory, I may lose my mind entirely. Only 27 more days, Arthur reminded her with barely suppressed amusement. Then you can delegate all such decisions to your own staff. That is the most romantic thing anyone has ever said to me. They rejoined the party, and the rest of the evening passed pleasantly enough. But Evelyn found her thoughts returning again and again to what lay ahead. Not just the wedding itself, but everything that would follow. The life they would build together, free from the scrutiny that had defined their courtship. The possibilities that stretched before them, limited only by their own courage and commitment. The final weeks before the wedding passed in an accelerating blur of preparations. Eveline's gown was completed, an elegant creation of ivory silk with delicate embroidery that had taken 3 seamstresses nearly a month to perfect. The guest list was finalized at just under 200 people, a carefully curated selection of those who had proven themselves true friends and allies. Arthur had insisted on St. George's in Hanover Square for the ceremony, despite the fact that such a public venue would invite maximum attention. I will not hide, he had told Eveline firmly. I will not marry you in some obscure chapel, as though we have something to be ashamed of. We will marry openly, publicly, and let anyone who wishes to object be damned." Eveline had agreed, though she suspected the real reason was less defiance and more a desire to showcase their union to the widest possible audience. Arthur wanted the world to know that he had won, not in any petty sense, but in the most fundamental way. He had found someone who loved him for himself, despite everything, and he was not about to be modest about it. The night before the wedding, Eveline found herself unable to sleep. She sat by her window overlooking the garden, watching clouds drift across the moon and trying to process the enormity of what tomorrow would bring. A soft knock at her door announced Charlotte's arrival. Her sister entered carrying 2 glasses of wine and wearing a knowing smile. "I thought you might appreciate some company," Charlotte said, settling herself on the window seat beside Eveline. "I remember my own night before the wedding, completely unable to rest, simultaneously excited and terrified." "I am not terrified," Eveline protested. Then, more honestly, well, perhaps slightly terrified, but mostly of disappointing him somehow, of not being the wife he deserves. "That is absurd. You are exactly the wife he deserves. Brilliant, brave, occasionally infuriating in the best possible way." Charlotte handed her one of the wine glasses. "He chose you, Evie. Not despite who you are, but because of it. That is not something you can disappoint." They sat in companionable silence for a moment, sipping wine and watching the garden. "Do you regret it?" Eveline asked suddenly. "The way things unfolded, all the gossip and social difficulty?" Charlotte considered this carefully. "No," she said finally. "I think perhaps we all needed this. You needed to discover that you could trust your own judgment even when the entire world questioned it. Arthur needed someone willing to fight for him rather than against him, and society needed to be reminded that reputation and truth are not always the same thing. That is very philosophical for midnight. I blame the wine." Charlotte nudged her shoulder affectionately. "But I am serious, Evie. What you and Arthur have fought for, that is real. That is lasting. The couples who have it easy from the beginning, who never face opposition or doubt, sometimes they take each other for granted. You two never will. You know exactly what you nearly lost, and that will make you treasure what you have. When did you become so wise? I have always been wise. You were simply too busy being stubborn to notice." They talked for another hour, about everything and nothing. Memories from their childhood, hopes for the future, speculation about what married life would bring. When Charlotte finally departed, Eveline felt calmer, more centered. Tomorrow she would marry Arthur, and nothing else mattered. She slept deeply and dreamlessly, waking to brilliant sunshine streaming through her window and her mother's excited voice announcing that it was her wedding day. The next hours passed in organized chaos. Breakfast she could barely eat, a bath that seemed to take forever, her mother and sister, and what felt like a dozen other women helping her dress and arrange her hair. The gown fit perfectly, the veil settled like a cloud of delicate lace, and when Eveline finally looked at herself in the full-length mirror, she hardly recognized the elegant woman staring back. "You are beautiful," her mother said, tears streaming down her face. "My darling girl, you are so beautiful. Do not cry, Mama. You will make me cry, and then Charlotte will cry, and we will all arrive at the church with red eyes and ruined complexions." But her mother only cried harder, and soon enough all 3 of them were weeping and laughing and embracing until Charlotte declared they were going to wrinkle the gown and they needed to compose themselves immediately. The carriage ride to St. George's felt both impossibly long and far too short. Eveline's father sat beside her, saying nothing but holding her hand in that steady, reassuring way he had done since she was a child. "Ready?" he asked, as the carriage slowed to a stop. "Terrified," she admitted. "But also, yes. Absolutely yes." The church was packed, every pew filled with people who had come to witness what had become the most talked-about wedding of the season. Eveline caught glimpses of familiar faces as she walked down the aisle on her father's arm, Charlotte beaming through fresh tears, Hampton looking proud, various friends and family members who had stood by them, and at the front, waiting at the altar, stood Arthur. He was devastating in his formal attire, dark and elegant, and utterly focused on her approach. His expression as she drew closer made her breath catch, love and awe and something so profound that it seemed impossible to contain in one person's face. When she reached the altar and her father placed her hand in Arthur's, Eveline felt something settle inside her chest. This was right. This was exactly where she was meant to be. The ceremony itself passed in a blur. She heard herself make her vows in a voice that barely trembled. Heard Arthur's responses, steady and sure. Felt the cold weight of the ring sliding onto her finger. And then the vicar was pronouncing them man and wife, and Arthur was lifting her veil, and his lips were on hers in a kiss that was both perfectly proper for church and somehow still managed to convey everything he could not say aloud. They were married. The wedding breakfast at Ashford House was a joyous affair. Toasts were made, some sentimental, some humorous, all celebrating the unlikely union that had captured London's imagination. Arthur kept Eveline close to his side throughout, his hand never far from hers, his attention constantly drawn back to her, even as he conversed with various guests. "You are being very obvious," she murmured at one point, when they had a moment of relative privacy. "Good," he replied unapologetically. "I want everyone to see exactly how besotted I am with my wife Eveline. Do you have any idea how extraordinarily satisfying it is to say that word? Almost as satisfying as saying my husband? Even more so, I suspect. I have been waiting 3 months to call you mine before all the world. You have called me yours in private for weeks now. Private is different. Private is ours alone. This," he gestured to the crowded room, "this is me claiming you publicly, letting everyone know that Lady Eveline Ashford, who once declared I was not good enough for her, chose me anyway. That is a victory worth celebrating. Your competitiveness is showing. You love my competitiveness." She did, though she would never admit it aloud. Instead, she simply smiled and allowed him to lead her back into the crowd of well-wishers. Late in the afternoon, as the party began to wind down, Charlotte cornered them both with a conspiratorial expression. "Your carriage is ready," she announced, "and I have taken the liberty of ensuring your departure will be free from the usual juvenile traditions. No one will be following you to make noise outside your windows or any such nonsense." "Charlotte, you are a saint," Arthur said fervently. "I know. You may name your first daughter after me as thanks." "We will consider it," Eveline said dryly, "though I make no promises." "Fair enough. Now go before Mother decides she needs to give you one more piece of advice about married life. I have already endured that particular conversation on your behalf, and trust me, you do not want a repeat performance." They made their farewells quickly, Eveline embracing her parents and sister, with promises to write frequently from Derbyshire. Then Arthur was handing her into their carriage, climbing in beside her, and they were away, leaving London and all its gossip and controversy behind them. For the first mile, neither of them spoke. Eveline stared out the window, watching the city give way to countryside, still trying to process that she was actually married, that the man beside her was her husband, that their life together had truly begun. "Regrets?" Arthur asked quietly, and something in his tone made her turn to look at him. "None whatsoever." "You?" "Only that we did not do this sooner." He reached for her hand, that gesture that had become so familiar over the past months. "Though I suppose the waiting made it sweeter. Charlotte said something similar last night, that couples who have it easy sometimes take each other for granted. Then we shall never have that problem." He lifted her hand to his lips, and this time there was no propriety to restrain him, no chaperone hovering nearby. "We fought for this, Eveline. We earned it. And I intend to spend every day of the rest of our lives ensuring you never regret choosing me. I already told you, no regrets, not a single one." The journey to Derbyshire would take 3 days, with stops at carefully selected inns along the way. But Eveline found she was in no hurry to arrive. These hours in the carriage, with Arthur beside her and the world falling away behind them, felt like a gift, a pocket of time that belonged only to them. They talked of everything and nothing as the miles passed. Plans for the estate, books they wanted to read together, mutual teasing about each other's quirks and habits. Arthur told her stories from his time in the military that he had never shared before. Not the glorious battles, but the small human moments that revealed his character. Eveline shared her own memories, her dreams for their future, her hopes that they might actually manage to be happy despite everything. As evening fell and they pulled into the first inn for the night, Eveline felt anticipation flutter in her stomach. They were married now. There would be no separate rooms, no chaperones, no restrictions, just the two of them finally, completely. Arthur must have sensed her nervousness because he squeezed her hand gently as they entered the inn. "We will take this at whatever pace you need," he murmured. "There is no rush." But as it turned out, there was a rush, at least on Eveline's part, because when the door to their room finally closed behind them, shutting out the rest of the world, she found herself pulling him close with an urgency that surprised them both. "I have been very patient," she informed him between kisses. "Very proper, very restrained. I am done being patient." His laugh was breathless and delighted. "Then by all means, my darling wife, let us be done with patience entirely." What followed was everything she had hoped and more, tender and passionate, awkward in moments and perfect in others, a discovery of each other that felt both entirely new and strangely familiar. Arthur was patient when she needed him to be, intense when she wanted him to be, and always present, focused entirely on her pleasure, her comfort, her joy. Afterward, lying tangled together in the darkness with his arms around her and her head on his chest, Eveline felt a profound sense of rightness settle over her. "I love you," she said quietly. "I do not say it enough, but I love you beyond measure." His arms tightened around her. "I know. I feel it in everything you do, everything you are. You do not need words to tell me, though hearing them is quite wonderful. Still, I want to say it. I love you, Arthur Ravenswood, my husband, my partner, my choice. And I love you, Eveline Ravenswood, my wife, my conscience, my home." They fell asleep like that, wrapped in each other, and the certain knowledge that whatever came next, they would face it together. The gossip would eventually fade. The scandal would be replaced by new scandals, but what they had built, this foundation of trust and truth and hard-won love, that would endure. The remaining days of travel passed in a similar haze of conversation, laughter and stolen moments of intimacy. Each mile that took them further from London felt like a weight lifting. By the time they finally arrived at Blackmore Hall in the Derbyshire countryside, Eveline felt like a different person from the woman who had attended Charlotte's wedding 3 months earlier. The estate was beautiful, sprawling grounds, elegant architecture, and a sense of history that seeped from every stone. But what struck Eveline most was how obviously it needed a woman's touch. The rooms were well maintained but impersonal, decorated with an eye toward function rather than warmth. "I know it needs work," Arthur said, watching her survey the entrance hall with a critical eye. "My uncle was a bachelor, and I have been in residence so rarely since inheriting that I have not had time to make real changes. But it is yours now, Eveline, to do with as you please." "Ours," she corrected. "It is ours, and I think it has wonderful potential." They spent the next week settling into married life with an ease that surprised them both. Arthur showed her every corner of the estate, introduced her to the staff and tenants, sought her opinion on matters of management that previous dukes had kept entirely to themselves. Eveline threw herself into the role of Duchess with characteristic determination, learning the household operations, getting to know the local families, beginning to transform Blackmore Hall into a true home. But it was the private moments she treasured most. Mornings when they lingered over breakfast, discussing the day ahead. Afternoons spent in the library, reading companionably or debating various subjects with the sort of intellectual passion that would have scandalized most married couples. Evenings by the fire, simply being together without need for conversation or performance. And nights, oh the nights, learning each other in ways that went beyond physical intimacy, sharing fears and hopes and dreams they had never voiced to anyone else. Building the kind of partnership that most people never found, based not on social obligation, but on genuine respect and desire. One evening, about 3 weeks into their honeymoon, they sat together on the terrace watching the sun set over the Derbyshire hills. Eveline was tucked against Arthur's side, his arm around her shoulders, both of them content to simply be. "Do you think they are still talking about us in London?" she asked idly. "Undoubtedly, but I find I care less with every passing day." He pressed a kiss to her temple. "Out here, away from all of that, I remember who I actually am, who we are together. It is remarkably freeing. We will have to return eventually, face society again. We will, but when we do, we will face it as a united front, as partners who have proven they can weather any storm." He tilted her face up to meet his eyes. "I am not concerned about London any more, Eveline. I have everything I need right here. She smiled, heart full to bursting. So do I, so do I. As the stars began to appear overhead and the air grew cool with evening, they remained on the terrace, wrapped in each other, and the quiet certainty of their love. Tomorrow they would begin planning their return to London, their re-entry into society, their next chapter. But tonight, they simply existed in this perfect moment, newlyweds in love, alone in the world, finally free to be exactly who they were meant to be. Together. London in May was a riot of colour and activity, every street corner bustling with carriages, every park crowded with promenaders, every ballroom packed with those eager to see and be seen. The season was in full swing, and society had a new obsession, the return of the Duke and Duchess of Blackmore. Their absence had only heightened the curiosity surrounding them. Rumours had circulated throughout their honeymoon, wild speculations about why they had stayed away so long, whether the marriage was already in trouble, if Eveline had realized her mistake and was too proud to admit it. The gossips had been working overtime, creating narratives that bore no resemblance to reality. When Arthur and Eveline's carriage finally rolled through the gates of Blackmore House in Mayfair, they found their butler, waiting with a silver tray piled high with calling cards and invitations. "It appears we are in demand," Arthur observed dryly, flipping through the stack. "Or society wishes to inspect us like specimens under glass," Eveline countered, reading over his shoulder. "Lady Pemberton has invited us to tea. I would rather eat glass." "We could decline." "We could. Or we could attend and let her see firsthand how blissfully happy we are. Deprive her of the satisfaction of being right about our supposed mismatch." Arthur grinned. "You are vengeful. I find it extraordinarily attractive." "I prefer to think of it as strategic." They spent their first week back in London re-establishing themselves carefully. Arthur resumed his seat in the House of Lords, taking up the political work he had largely avoided during his years of social exile. Eveline called upon her family, reconnected with Charlotte and Hampton, and began accepting the most promising of the social invitations that continued to flood in. The response to their return was mixed, but leaning decidedly in their favour. Those who had supported them during the scandal welcomed them warmly. Those who had remained neutral now seemed eager to be included in their circle. And those who had openly opposed their match found themselves increasingly isolated as society's mood shifted. The turning point came at the Hendersons' garden party, one of the first major events of the season. Every notable family in London would be in attendance, including several who had cut the Ashfords directly after the engagement announcement. Eveline dressed with particular care, selecting a gown of pale green silk that made her eyes look impossibly blue, and arranging her hair in the latest fashion. "You are armouring yourself," Arthur observed as he watched her preparations. "I am presenting my best self. There is a difference." "Is there? Because from where I stand, your best self is the woman who wears her nightgown until noon and debates philosophy over breakfast while her hair is still tangled from sleep." Eveline felt warmth spread through her chest at his words. This was what she had gained in their marriage, someone who saw past the social performance to the woman beneath, who valued her for qualities society would consider faults. "That woman is for you alone," she said softly. "The rest of the world gets the Duchess." "Then the rest of the world is missing out extraordinarily." The garden party was already crowded when they arrived, and Eveline felt numerous eyes turn their way as they were announced. She kept her head high, her hand steady on Arthur's arm, her expression serene. Let them look. Let them judge. She had nothing to hide and nothing to prove. Charlotte materialized at her side almost immediately, Hampton trailing behind with their newborn son in the arms of his nurse. "You look magnificent," Charlotte announced, kissing her cheek. "And you," she turned to Arthur, "look properly besotted. Excellent work maintaining the appearance of martial harmony." "It is not an appearance," Arthur replied mildly. "I genuinely am besotted. Even better. Now come, there are several people dying to speak with you, and I have taken it upon myself to vet them first to ensure they are not secretly horrible." The afternoon unfolded with surprising pleasantness. True, there were awkward encounters with people who had previously shunned them, but there were also warm conversations with genuine friends, introduction to new families who had only recently come to London, and a growing sense that perhaps they truly had weathered the worst of the storm. It was near sunset, as the party was beginning to wind down, when Eveline found herself face to face with Lady Whitmore for the first time since before the wedding. The older woman looked diminished somehow, her usual imperious bearing replaced with something that almost resembled defeat. She stood alone near the garden wall, watching the festivities with an expression Eveline could not quite read. "Lady Whitmore," Eveline said, approaching against her better judgment. Arthur was across the garden in conversation with Hampton, and she found herself grateful for the privacy. "I hope you are well." "As well as can be expected, given the circumstances." Lady Whitmore's voice was brittle. "I suppose you have come to gloat?" "No. I have come because holding grudges is exhausting, and I have better things to do with my energy." "How magnanimous of you." "It is not magnanimity. It is self-interest." Eveline kept her tone even. "You tried to destroy my husband's reputation. You nearly succeeded. But in the end, the truth prevailed, and here we are, happy, married, and moving forward with our lives. What you did caused pain, but it did not break us. If anything, it made us stronger." Lady Whitmore's face crumpled slightly. "I love my daughter. I wanted the best for her. Is that so terrible?" "No. But destroying someone else to achieve your goals for her, that is terrible, and it is something I hope you have learned from." "I have learned that power is more fleeting than I believed. That reputation can be destroyed far more easily than I ever imagined possible, that perhaps—" She drew a shaky breath. "Perhaps I should have accepted defeat with more grace." It was not an apology, not quite, but it was as close as someone like Lady Whitmore was likely to come. Eveline felt a flicker of something that might have been pity. "We all make choices we regret," Eveline said finally. "The measure of character is not in avoiding mistakes, but in how we respond to their consequences." She did not wait for a response, simply inclined her head and moved away. When she rejoined Arthur, he immediately sensed something had shifted. "What happened?" "I believe Lady Whitmore just conceded defeat. Not in so many words, but in the way that matters." "And how do you feel about that?" Eveline considered the question carefully, relieved, vindicated, but also slightly sad. "She destroyed herself pursuing vengeance against you. That is a hollow victory for everyone involved." Arthur pulled her close, mindless of watching eyes. "You are extraordinary, do you know that? Most people in your position would want to twist the knife. I told you, I have better things to do. Like dancing with my husband, for instance, since I see the musicians are beginning to play." They danced as the sun set over the Henderson Gardens, and Eveline felt the last vestiges of tension drain from her shoulders. This was what she had fought for, not social acceptance or vindication, but simply the freedom to live her life with the man she loved without constant battle. The weeks that followed established them firmly within society's upper echelons. Arthur's work in Parliament gained him respect across political lines. Eveline's intelligence and wit made her a sought-after conversation partner at every gathering. Together, they hosted dinners and musicales that were noted for their interesting guest lists and stimulating conversation, rather than merely impressive displays of wealth. But perhaps most importantly, they built a reputation as a couple whose devotion to one another was both genuine and inspiring. They were seen walking together in Hyde Park most mornings, observed laughing at various social events, noted for the way they actively sought each other out in crowded rooms. "You two are becoming insufferable," Charlotte informed them one afternoon over tea at Blackmore House. "All this happiness and mutual admiration, it is making the rest of us look bad." "Then perhaps the rest of you should try actually liking your spouses," Eveline retorted. "I do like Hampton. I am simply saying that you two have set an unreasonably high standard for marital harmony. We had to fight for this," Arthur said seriously. "We earned it. That makes it precious in a way that arrangements made purely for social advantage never could be." Charlotte's expression softened. "I know, and I am genuinely happy for you both, even if you are insufferable about it." As summer approached and the season began winding down, Arthur and Eveline made plans to split their time between London and Derbyshire. They had obligations in town, Arthur's parliamentary work, various social commitments, but they had both come to treasure the privacy and freedom of the country estate. "We should host a house party this autumn," Eveline suggested one evening as they reviewed their calendar. "Invite Charlotte and Hampton, a few other close friends. Really open Blackmore Hall to the people who stood by us." "I love that idea. Though I confess part of me wants to keep you entirely to myself. You have me to yourself plenty. Besides, we cannot hide away forever. We have a position in society now, and responsibilities that come with it. Responsibilities. Arthur pulled her onto his lap despite her protests that they were supposed to be working. Very weighty and serious. However shall we manage? With dignity and grace and appropriate attention to duty, Eveline said primly, even as she relaxed against his chest, which starts with finishing this correspondence instead of distracting me. I am not distracting you. I am providing moral support. You are being impossible. I am being in love with you. There is a difference. They did eventually finish their correspondence, though it took considerably longer than it should have. But this, Eveline reflected, was one of the great joys of marriage. The freedom to be distracted, to be playful, to forget about duty and responsibility for a few moments and simply enjoy each other's presence. In August, they received word that Miss Cecilia Whitmore had become engaged to a respectable gentleman of modest means who valued her for herself rather than her connections. The announcement included a brief note from Cecilia herself, addressed to both Arthur and Eveline. Your Grace, your Ladyship, I hope this letter finds you well. I write to inform you of my engagement to Mr. Thomas Crawford, and to thank you for the grace you showed my family during our darkest days. I know I do not deserve your forgiveness, but I want you to know that I have learned from my mistakes. I have learned that honor matters more than social position, and that truth, while painful, is always better than comfortable lies. I wish you both every happiness. You have earned it. Sincerely, Cecilia Whitmore. Well, Eveline said after reading the note aloud. That is unexpectedly mature of her. People can change, Arthur observed, when they are given reason to and opportunity to do so. You are being remarkably charitable about someone who nearly destroyed your life, because she was young and manipulated by someone who should have known better, and because holding on to anger serves no purpose now. He took Eveline's hand. We won, my love. We have everything we wanted. I can afford to be generous. When did you become so wise? The moment I fell in love with you. You inspire me to be better than I am. That is the worst line you have ever used, and I have heard some truly terrible ones. Yet you married me anyway. What does that say about your judgment? That I am occasionally willing to overlook dramatic tendencies in favor of underlying character. They composed a gracious response to Cecilia's note, wishing her well in her new life. It felt like closing a chapter, putting the past truly behind them and focusing on the future they were building together. As autumn arrived and London began to empty as families retreated to their country estates, Arthur and Eveline prepared for their promised house party. The guest list was small but carefully curated. Charlotte and Hampton with their son, several of Arthur's military friends with their wives, and a few of the political allies he had developed in Parliament. The week of the party was everything Eveline had hoped. Long walks through the Derbyshire countryside, stimulating conversations over dinner, games and music in the evenings. Arthur was relaxed and happy, in a way she had never seen him in London, surrounded by people he trusted and free from the constant scrutiny of society. On the final night, after the guests had retired and they sat together in the library, Eveline found herself reflecting on how far they had come. "Do you remember," she said quietly, "when I told my father you were not good enough for me? How could I forget? You have reminded me approximately every other day since then. I was so certain, so absolutely convinced I knew what kind of man you were." She turned to face him. "I am embarrassed by how wrong I was. Do not be. You are protecting yourself, making judgments based on the information available. The fact that you were willing to revise those judgments when presented with evidence, that is wisdom, not weakness. Still, I wish I had seen you clearly from the beginning. If you had, perhaps we would not have appreciated what we found." Arthur pulled her close. "Perhaps we needed the struggle to understand the value of what we were fighting for." Charlotte said something similar, that couples who have it easy sometimes take each other for granted. Then we shall never have that problem. They sat in comfortable silence for a moment before Arthur spoke again, his tone more serious. "I have something to tell you. Something I have been waiting for the right moment to share." Eveline's pulse quickened slightly. "That sounds ominous." "Not ominous, just significant." He took her hand. "I have decided to sponsor a bill in Parliament, one addressing the sorts of character assassination and reputation destruction that nearly destroyed me, making it legally actionable when false accusations are spread with malicious intent. Eveline stared at him. That is brilliant, and exactly the sort of thing that could help countless people who lack the resources or position to defend themselves. That is what I thought. Hampton has agreed to help with the drafting, and I have several colleagues who support the concept. It will not be easy. There are legitimate concerns about limiting speech, but I think we can craft something that protects innocent people without creating new problems. When did you decide this? I've been thinking about it since our wedding, but I wanted to wait until we were truly settled, until I was certain of my own footing, before taking on such a significant project. He met her eyes. And I wanted your input. This affects you as much as it affects me. My input is that you should absolutely pursue it. Use what happened to us to prevent it from happening to others. That is the best possible outcome from all of this. I was hoping you would say that. He kissed her softly. Thank you, Eveline, for supporting me in this, for supporting me in everything. We are partners, remember? Your fights are my fights. Your victories are my victories. And your stubbornness is my daily cross to bear. You love my stubbornness. I do, he agreed readily. I love everything about you, even the parts that drive me absolutely mad. As they made their way upstairs eventually, Eveline found herself marveling at the strange path that had brought them to this moment. If someone had told her a year ago that she would be married to Arthur Ravenswood, would be deliriously happy in that marriage, would be planning their future together with such confidence, she never would have believed it. But here they were, living proof that truth could triumph over lies, that love could survive social censure, that two people determined to see each other clearly could build something lasting and real. The months that followed were among the happiest of Eveline's life. Arthur's bill began making its way through Parliament, generating significant discussion and debate. Their social standing continued to strengthen as more people came to know them and appreciate their intelligence and character, and most importantly, their relationship deepened with each passing day. They learned to fight productively, to apologize sincerely, to forgive completely. They discovered each other's quirks and preferences, accommodating some and gently pushing back against others. They built a partnership based on mutual respect and genuine affection, rather than social obligation or family pressure, and they continued to surprise people with how genuinely devoted they were to one another. At balls and dinners and social gatherings, they were the couple consistently found together, talking, laughing, clearly enjoying each other's company in a way that seemed almost scandalous for married people. "You two really must stop being so obviously in love," Lady Pemberton told them at one event, though her tone had lost its earlier censure and held something almost like respect. "You are making the rest of us feel like we have missed something fundamental about marriage." "Perhaps you have," Arthur replied cheerfully. "Perhaps everyone has. Perhaps marriage is meant to be more than a social arrangement, meant to be an actual partnership between people who genuinely like each other." "What a radical notion," Eveline added dryly. But the comment seemed to resonate. Over the following weeks, they noticed subtle shifts in the conversations around them. More people questioning whether they needed to marry for social advantage. More young ladies insisting on actually knowing their suitors before accepting proposals. More emphasis on compatibility and character than on title and fortune. "We are starting a revolution," Charlotte observed one afternoon. "A quiet one perhaps, but a revolution nonetheless." "That was never our intention," Eveline protested. "The best revolutions never are. They simply happen when enough people see a better way and decide to pursue it." Charlotte smiled at her sister. "You and Arthur, you are showing people what marriage can be when it is based on truth and choice rather than obligation. That is powerful." As their first wedding anniversary approached, Arthur asked Eveline what she wanted to do to celebrate. "I want to return to St. George's," she said without hesitation. "Stand where we stood a year ago and remember what we promised each other. Then perhaps a quiet dinner, just the two of us, where we can reflect on everything that has happened." "That is perfect." Arthur pulled her close. "Though I confess I would be happy celebrating anywhere, as long as I am with you." "When did you become such a romantic?" "The moment I met you. You simply did not notice because you were too busy despising me." "I never despised you, I was merely cautious. You told your father I was not good enough for you." Yes, well, I have since revised that opinion. Have you? How generous of you. They were still teasing each other when they arrived at St. George's on their anniversary. The church was quiet, empty, except for them and their memories. They stood at the altar where they had taken their vows, hands clasped, both remembering the nervousness and joy of that day. "Do you know what I was thinking?" Arthur said quietly, "when you walked down the aisle toward me. That I looked beautiful in my wedding gown? Well, yes, obviously, but also that I could not believe you had chosen me. That out of everyone in London, every man who might have courted you, you had decided I was worth the fight." He lifted her hand to his lips. "That remains the greatest honor of my life." "And I was thinking," Eveline replied, "that I had never been more certain of anything. That every doubt, every moment of fear, every bit of social pressure, none of it mattered compared to what I felt standing beside you. That I was exactly where I belonged." They renewed their vows quietly, just the two of them and the empty church, reaffirming promises they had already kept faithfully for a year. Then they made their way to a private dining room Arthur had reserved, where they spent the evening reminiscing about their journey together. "Remember when you refused to dance with me at Charlotte's wedding?" Arthur asked over wine. "I was being sensible. You were a notorious rake with a terrible reputation. I was a man falsely accused who desperately wanted to know the woman brave enough to look past gossip." "Well, when you put it that way, I sound rather heroic." "You were heroic. You are heroic." Arthur's expression grew serious. "Eveline, this year with you has been the happiest of my life. You have given me everything I never knew I needed. Partnership, purpose, a reason to be better than I am. I love you more today than I did when we married, and I suspect I will love you even more tomorrow." Eveline felt tears prick her eyes. "That is unfair. You know I cannot compete with such romantic declarations." "Then do not compete. Simply tell me what is in your heart." She took a breath, gathering her thoughts. "You have made me braver. Before you, I was content to observe life from a safe distance, to judge and analyze without truly engaging. But you challenged me to step into the arena, to fight for what I believed in, even when it was difficult. You showed me that being right matters less than being true. That courage is not the absence of fear, but the decision to act despite it." She squeezed his hand. "I love you, Arthur. Not despite the scandal or the struggle, but partly because of it. We built something real together, something that will last, because we know exactly what we fought to protect. Now, who is being romantic? I learned from the best." They returned home to Blackmore House later that evening, both pleasantly tired and deeply content. As they prepared for bed, Eveline found herself thinking about what Charlotte had said, about starting a quiet revolution, about showing people what marriage could be. It was true, she realized. They had become something larger than themselves, whether they intended to or not. Their story had captured London's imagination, not because of the scandal itself, but because of how they had responded to it, with dignity, with determination, with absolute conviction that what they were fighting for mattered more than society's approval. "What are you thinking?" Arthur asked, catching her contemplative expression. "That we have become rather important without meaning to. Important, symbolic. People look at us and see proof that choosing love over convenience is possible, that reputation can be rebuilt, that truth eventually prevails. That is a heavy burden to carry." "Perhaps, but I think we are equal to it." She turned to face him fully. "We have survived the worst society could throw at us. Everything from here is just details." Arthur laughed and pulled her close. "I adore your pragmatism. Most wives would wax poetic about romance and destiny. You reduce our entire courtship to surviving social censure. Someone must keep us grounded. Then I am grateful it is you." They fell asleep, wrapped around each other, secure in the knowledge that whatever came next, they would face it together. The following spring brought unexpected news. Eveline was pregnant. The discovery filled them both with joy and terror in equal measure. The realization that they were creating new life, new responsibility, new dimensions to their partnership. "A child," Arthur kept saying, as though he could not quite believe it. "We are going to have a child." "That is typically what happens when married people share a bed with enthusiasm and regularity," Eveline replied dryly, though she was secretly delighted by his wonder. "Should you be resting? Should I call for the physician? Should we—" "Arthur!" She took his face in her hands. "I am pregnant, not dying. Women have been doing this since the beginning of humanity. I will be fine." But he fussed over her anyway, restricting her activities, and insisting she avoid anything even remotely strenuous. Eveline bore this with good humor, recognizing it for what it was, not controlling behavior, but fear born of love. He had found happiness after years of believing it impossible. The thought of losing her terrified him. "I am not going anywhere," she told him one evening when his anxiety was particularly visible. "I am strong and healthy and attended by the best physicians in London. Our child will be born safely, and we will begin the next chapter of our lives together. You cannot promise that." "No, but I can promise that I will fight with everything I have to make it true, just as I fought for us, just as I will fight for our child." She placed his hand on her still flat stomach. "We are in this together, remember? All three of us now." Arthur's expression softened, and he pulled her close. "All three of us," he echoed. "I rather like the sound of that." As summer approached and Eveline's condition became obvious, they withdrew to Derbyshire for the remainder of her confinement. London could wait. Society could wait. Right now all that mattered was preparing for their child's arrival and enjoying these final months of being just the two of them. The baby, a daughter they named Catherine, was born on a brilliant autumn morning with surprisingly little difficulty. When the midwife placed the squalling infant in Eveline's arms, she felt something shift fundamentally in her understanding of the world. This tiny, perfect creature was theirs, created from their love, dependent on their care, a living symbol of everything they had built together. Arthur, who had been pacing the hallway for hours, despite Eveline's insistence that childbirth was a perfectly natural process, nearly wept when he finally held his daughter. "She is perfect," he whispered, cradling Catherine with the sort of reverence usually reserved for holy relics. "Absolutely perfect." "She has your eyes," Eveline observed from the bed, exhausted but elated. "And your stubborn chin. We are doomed." Wonderfully doomed. Charlotte and Hampton arrived the following week with their own son, now an energetic toddler who viewed his new cousin with great suspicion. The two families spent a week together at Blackmore Hall, and watching Arthur with their daughter, Eveline felt her heart expand with a love so profound it was almost painful. This was what they had fought for. Not just their own happiness, but the possibility of this. A family built on truth and love rather than social obligation. A child who would grow up knowing her parents had chosen each other deliberately, had fought against considerable opposition to be together, had built something lasting and real. "She will have quite the story to tell when she is older," Charlotte observed one afternoon as they watched the men walking through the garden with the children, about how her parents' courtship scandalized all of London. "I hope by then it will seem quaint rather than shocking, that society will have moved past judging people based on gossip and rumor. Thanks in no small part to you and Arthur. That bill he sponsored has changed things, Evie. People are more careful now about spreading false accusations, more aware of the damage such things can do." "Good. Then perhaps Catherine will grow up in a world slightly less cruel than the one we inherited." They returned to London the following spring, with Catherine in tow, prepared to resume their social obligations. The response to their daughter's arrival was overwhelmingly positive. Invitations flooded in, gifts appeared at their door, and society seemed genuinely delighted by the newest member of the Blackmore family. "You see," Arthur said as they prepared for their first major social event since Catherine's birth. "All that scandal, all that difficulty, and now we are the toast of the season. Society has a remarkably short memory. Society has been proven wrong, and is now attempting to save face by pretending they supported us all along," Eveline corrected. "But I will accept their congratulations graciously, because I am mature and forgiving. You are vengeful and strategic." That too. The ball that evening was everything a society event should be: lavish decorations, excellent music, guests dressed in their finest. But what Eveline noticed most was how people treated them, not with the mixture of curiosity and censure that had marked their early appearances, but with genuine respect and warmth. They had won, completely and unequivocally. They had proven that love based on truth could survive social censure, that reputation could be rebuilt, that those willing to fight for what they believed in could triumph over those who dealt in lies and innuendo. As they danced together that evening, moving through the familiar patterns of the waltz, Eveline found herself thinking about that night at Charlotte's wedding when they had first met. How certain she had been that Arthur was everything society claimed. How determined she had been to remain unaffected by his attention. "What are you smiling about?" Arthur asked, noticing her expression. "I was remembering when I told my father you were not good enough for me." "Ah, yes, your greatest miscalculation. How does it feel to have been so spectacularly wrong?" "Wonderful, actually. Being wrong about you is the best mistake I ever made." "That might be the most romantic thing you have ever said to me." "Do not let it go to your head. I still maintain you are occasionally insufferable, and I still maintain you are magnificently stubborn. We are well matched." They were indeed. In every way that mattered, they complemented each other perfectly, his optimism balanced by her pragmatism, her intensity softened by his humor, both of them committed to building something lasting and true. As the season continued, they settled into a comfortable routine. Arthur's work in Parliament kept him engaged and fulfilled. Eveline managed their household and social obligations, while also pursuing her own interests in literature and political philosophy. Catherine thrived under the attention of doting parents and a household staff who adored her. They hosted dinners and gatherings that became known for their stimulating conversation and diverse guest lists. They supported young couples who faced similar opposition to their own matches, offering advice and occasionally practical assistance. They used their position and influence to push for reforms that would protect others from the sort of character assassination Arthur had endured. In short, they built a life that mattered, not just to themselves, but to the broader society they inhabited. One evening, several years after their marriage, they found themselves at a Christmas ball, not unlike the one where Arthur had first proposed. The ballroom was decorated with evergreen boughs and ribbons, candles casting everything in warm light, music filling the air. They stood together near the windows, watching the festivities with the sort of comfortable contentment that came from years of partnership. Catherine was at home with her nurse, along with her younger brother, William, who had been born the previous spring. Their family had grown, their influence had expanded, and their love had only deepened with time. "Do you remember," Arthur said quietly, "that first Christmas ball, when you agreed to accept my courtship despite everything? I remember being terrified and exhilarated in equal measure, certain I was making either the best or worst decision of my life." "And which was it?" Eveline turned to look at him, this man who had proven himself worthy of every risk she had taken. "The best, unequivocally the best, even though it cost you so much. It cost me nothing that mattered and gave me everything I needed." She took his hand. "We built something real, Arthur, something lasting. Our children will grow up knowing that love based on truth and choice is possible, that reputation matters less than character, that fighting for what you believe in is always worthwhile, even when it is difficult." We have become rather philosophical in our old age. We are hardly old. I am not yet 30. Ancient, then. Insufferable. He laughed and pulled her close, scandalizing several matrons who still believed married couples should maintain proper distance in public. "I love you, Eveline Ravenswood. I loved you when you despised me, when you defended me, when you married me. I love you now, watching our children grow and our influence expand. And I will love you when we are actually old, sitting by the fire at Blackmore Hall and remembering all of this." That is quite the declaration for a Christmas ball. It seemed appropriate. This is where it all began, after all, where you first agreed to give me a chance. And you have not squandered it. I have tried not to, though I suspect you would tell me immediately if I were failing. Absolutely. You may count on my complete honesty in all matters. They danced one more waltz before the evening ended, and as they moved through the familiar steps, Eveline reflected on how far they had come. From that first contentious meeting to this moment of perfect understanding, from social pariahs to respected members of society, from two people fighting against the world to partners who had changed it in small but meaningful ways. The scandal that had once threatened to destroy them had instead become the foundation of something stronger. Their story, once whispered with disapproval, was now told with admiration. The Duke and Duchess of Blackmore, who had chosen each other despite impossible opposition, and built a marriage that proved love could triumph over lies. "Not even if he were the last man in London," someone nearby was saying, repeating the famous quote that had started everything. Can you imagine? And now look at them, utterly devoted. Eveline caught Arthur's eye and smiled. Let them talk. Let them marvel at the transformation. Let them use their story as proof that truth and love could survive anything society threw at them. Because 3 months after that declaration, it had indeed become the season's greatest scandal. But years later, it had become something else entirely. Proof that choosing love over convenience, truth over reputation, courage over fear, was not only possible, but worthwhile. They had fought for each other when it would have been easier to surrender. They had built something real when the world expected them to fail. And they had proven, to themselves and to everyone watching, that the greatest love stories were not the ones that came easily, but the ones worth fighting for. As the clock struck midnight, and they prepared to depart for home, Arthur helped Eveline into her cloak and pressed a kiss to her temple. "Thank you," he murmured. "For what?" "For seeing me, for choosing me, for building this life with me. Thank you for being worth the fight." They walked out into the winter night together, hand in hand, partners in every sense of the word. Behind them, London's elite continued their celebrations, unaware that the couple they had once condemned had become the standard against which all other marriages would be measured. And ahead of them lay decades more of partnership, love, challenges met and overcome together. Children who would grow up knowing their parents' story. Grandchildren who would hear tales of the scandalous courtship that became a legendary marriage. But for now, in this moment, there was simply this. 2 people who had chosen each other against impossible odds, who had fought for their love when the world stood against them, who had built something lasting and true from the wreckage of lies and rumour. Lady Eveline Ashford had once declared that Arthur Ravenswood was not good enough for her, not even if he were the last man in London. But she had been wrong. Spectacularly, wonderfully wrong. Because Arthur Ravenswood, the Duke of Blackmore, was not the last man in London. He was simply the only one who had ever truly mattered, the only one who had seen her clearly and loved her completely, the only one worth fighting for, worth choosing, worth spending forever with. And that, Eveline thought as their carriage carried them home through the snowy streets of London, that was worth any scandal society could manufacture. That was worth everything. Dear listeners, thank you so much for joining us on this journey through Lady Eveline and Duke Arthur's story. Their path from enemies to soulmates, from scandal to triumph, reminds us that true love is worth fighting for, even when the whole world stands against you. If you enjoyed this tale of courage, conviction, and Christmas magic, we would be so grateful if you would subscribe to our channel so you never miss another story. Please leave a comment telling us your favorite moment from Eveline and Arthur's journey. We absolutely love hearing from you. Don't forget to give this video a like if it touched your heart, and activate notifications so you're the first to know when we release new historical romances. Your support means the world to us and helps us continue bringing you these sweeping love stories. Until next time, may you always choose love over fear, truth over rumor, and courage over convenience. With all our affection, your storytellers.